When I moved to Barcelona a decade ago, I couldn't believe that I wasn't dreaming. I couldn't believe that a city so beautiful and interesting and pleasant and easy to explore on foot was a real place that real people lived their day-to-day lives in and not just a vacation spot or a movie set. And I couldn't understand how cities like it could exist in the world, and yet the vast majority of our cities are still far away in terms of design, walkability, and quality of life. We've figured it out, I thought. Here it is. Here is a near-perfect city. So why isn't this everywhere? What is holding us back from creating more cities like this one? It's as though we believe Barcelona is some kind of outlier that came to be by chance, instead of the meticulously planned and designed city that it actually is. So in this episode, we're going to take a closer look at what makes Barcelona so great and how that can be replicated in other cities around the world. Welcome to the Perfect City Podcast. I'm Tayana Panova, Doctor of Psychology focusing on urban planning's impact on health, and my co-host Ariel Viera is a documentarian that examines the intersection between history and urbanism. So let's dive in. What makes Barcelona so good, especially in regards to urban planning?
That is a great question because Barcelona has always been a city that has fascinated me, and I managed to visit it for the first time last year, and I was stunned at how seamless the city. As we mentioned in the intro episode, I didn't need to think about what I was going to do, where I was going to eat, how was I going to get to this other different neighborhood. Everything just felt very fluid in Barcelona.
What impressed me the most about Barcelona, especially initially, was how comfortable it was. And that wasn't a word that I think I'd ever used to describe a city, comfortable. Because the moment that you enter into the urban area, you feel like you're in your living room, in a sense. I think a great city should feel like your living room because you have a sense for where everything is. You have all of your amenities close by, like places to eat, places to rest, green spaces, places to relax, and you feel a sense of comfort rather than stress, which I think a lot of our cities cause us stress. And that's mainly because they are full of cars, which create a lot of noise and pollution and danger because we constantly have to be crossing paths with them. And also because of the architecture. So much of the architecture, especially in American cities, in Asian cities as well, in South American cities, a lot of what we associate with cities and urban life these days is these big, tall, square often or rectangular, metal or concrete or glass buildings, these monoliths, this architecture that has this modern feel that doesn't feel very cozy or pleasant or comfortable or beautiful, but that has become characteristic of a modern city. And so when we go to places like Barcelona or other cities in Europe and we see this older kind of more beautiful and ornate architecture, that creates a sense of joy and pleasure, which also highly elevates the experience of being in the city. I think Barcelona, apart from its planning, which we'll talk about in this episode, which is so clever and so brilliant, its design, its architecture is one of its main draws, which is just so beautiful. And when you walk around, it's a joy. It's a pleasure to be around these buildings that, Gaudí is famous for his very unique buildings in Barcelona, but even other architects and other buildings in Barcelona that are not Gaudí are made with the intention to be beautiful and to be aesthetic and to cause pleasure, to create pleasure for the passerby. And I think that's really important for a perfect city.
Yeah, and Barcelona actually has its urban planning roots to the ancient world. Mm-hmm. So 2,000 years ago, the very first urban planner that we know of, Hippodamos, designed the port city of Athens, Piraeus. Cerda in 1860, the urban planner that redesigned Barcelona as we know it today, took his ideas from Hippodamos. Cerda's idea was to really make a city that air could actually easily pass through. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a great way of thinking about a city because I think at that time in the mid-1800s, people were really concerned about air quality because of the rapid industrialization of Europe. and cities like London were choked with smog. It was very important for people in the city of Barcelona to have a place where you can breathe. And I think it's still very evident today as you're walking around. You can breathe easily in Barcelona, even though Cerdà's plans have changed significantly since the 1860s in many respects. The core idea is still there. It's a city that breathes.
In Barcelona, for those of you who haven't visited or haven't seen what Barcelona looks like, there is this older part, like the Gothic neighborhoods. Then in the 1800s, it was extended because it became a very popular destination and a lot more people wanted to live there, and they just needed to expand. And so it extended into what we call the Champla neighborhood. And Champla, if I'm correct, it means extension in Catalan. And that, Cerda is that's the neighborhood that he designed with these new principles of bringing in more air and light and greenery, like you talked about, Ariel, and using these new sort of urban planning principles that you don't see those in the old city. Like if you look at Barcelona, the map from above, it's very interesting because the old city is like this labyrinth-like streets and neighborhoods, and then you have the Champla extension neighborhood, which is a grid. And it's a very interesting contrast that those two things coexist in the city. The blocks themselves are unique because they're octagonal. They're not squares because their points are cut off to create more light reaches the ground level, more air manages to flow, and it feels more open. And that was the goal. That was his goal, was to bring in more oxygen and to get these places feeling sunnier and more enjoyable. And so he created this block design, which we call chamfered corners, where the corners are basically cut off of the block and you have more space for seating, for example, for outdoor cafes. You have motorbike parking, and you have a lot more sunshine and fresh air flowing, and trees are often planted there. And although it's a grid, which tends to be a pretty rigid design structure, and I personally am not a fan of the grid. For example, in New York City, I don't think the grid works very well in Manhattan, but I think that in Champla in Barcelona, it works really well because of the chamfered corners and because it's not the only type of urban planning within the city. Like I mentioned earlier, you have that core Gothic labyrinth type city structure, and then you have the grid one. So that balance, I think that duality makes it more interesting.
Inadvertently, it ended up making car traffic flow easier due to the cutoff corners.
Unfortunate side effect.
And it caught. No, but it was actually a positive one because the pedestrians don't encounter cars as directly as more traditional intersections. So what's your first experience in Barcelona? You were there for a while ago.
Yes, so I lived almost a decade in Barcelona. I did my PhD in Barcelona because a research group that was doing a lot of great research on the topic that was my focus area was based in Barcelona. So I basically came to Barcelona to do research with that very prolific research group about technology and mental health and things like that. So I came to do that, and then I lived here for several years. I fell in love with the city. When people ask what radicalized me about urbanism, is probably Barcelona, because when I arrived here, after having lived many years in the suburbs in the United States, when I arrived in Barcelona, and I just realized that cities can be wonderful and pleasant and beautiful. They can be great places that also feel safe and comfortable. And I couldn't understand why we didn't have more of them, and see that the quality of life is so great in a city that's well planned and well designed. That's what really impassioned me to spread the word and spread these lessons that I saw being put in practice in Barcelona very successfully. Human-centered planning and design, where the focus is the experience of people, of the pedestrian. Now, Barcelona is famous in the urban planning world for its Superblocks project. There's also green streets are part of the Superblocks plan. And that's when they take a street that normally supported car traffic and they transform it into a pedestrian street. And the most famous example of that is Consell de Cent Street, which has become transformed into a lush green pedestrian street with gardens and benches and cafes overflowing with seating. In 1 year, they transformed this very central, high traffic street into a pedestrian paradise. And I was like, fascinated, because it was this plan to create a city that's more pedestrian friendly, that's healthier, and that leads to higher quality of life. That's the reason why it's being implemented. It's to take space that has been dedicated to cars and give it back to people. And it works, and it's great. And it not only makes people happy because they've done, before and after analyses of health metrics and air pollution metrics, and, tons of health impact data has been collected, and it shows that, things have improved greatly. Not only that, but it's also great for businesses. And very important to note that this kind of moderate, gentle density, we would say, because these buildings are all about 6 floors. They're not higher. These are all approximately 5 to 6 floor buildings, except that 6th floor height is consistent throughout the whole neighborhood, which is a huge neighborhood. And so you have all of the buildings being 6 floors, but because it is a consistent moderate density, it actually fits a ton of people, more so than cities that have skyscrapers and that have really tall buildings intermixed with very low buildings. Many people would be surprised to know that, for example, Paris and Barcelona have a higher population density than New York, because it doesn't feel like that, because you have so much light and air, since they're not skyscrapers. And actually, because you have this homogeneous, evenly distributed population throughout the neighborhoods, because all the buildings are like this, they're spread out. The people are spread out. They're not concentrated in certain areas, giving you the sense of crowdedness that's so oppressive and suffocating. They're spread out. And actually, if you walk through Champlain neighborhood, you hardly even see people. It's actually incredibly tranquil because it's been designed this way.
There's a psychological impact of walking around an area that's only about 6 stories tall, and the street has a certain amount of width to the ratio of the height.
Yes.
Which is usually a 1-to-1 in Barcelona. Same thing in Paris and a few other cities.
Yeah, definitely. It is great for mental health and well-being. You feel comfortable in this city because humans are drawn to a sense of enclosure. And the easiest way to think about this is coziness. We like to feel cozy. We don't like to feel overwhelmed or intimidated by huge structures looming over us, which is what we see in many cities like New York City. We see these incredibly tall buildings that block out the sun, and they are just daunting. We are so small compared to them, and we must also walk in shadow because they block out the light. So that's not as comfortable as a cozy sense of enclosure created by moderately height buildings that allow for sunlight to reach through and that have street trees to filter that sunlight and to create texture and to create greenery and to create fresh air. It's not just the height of the buildings. It's like you said, it's the ratio, because if you have a moderately height building like a 6th floor Barcelona building, but you have a strode, which is a huge street/road, which we often have in the United States, these enormous streets that run right through commercial areas in the suburbs especially.
That's one of the beauties about Barcelona that I think most people may not be aware of as they're walking through. They might think, oh, this is a pleasant neighborhood, but they're actually are not quite aware that the reason it's pleasant is because of this golden ratio in terms of urbanism.
Absolutely. I love that term.
Barcelona is not without its challenges, because like many other major cities in the world, it was choked with cars in the past century. So Barcelona has been taking measures to prevent too much car traffic and too much on-street parking, and that is the Superblock.
Barcelona actually has one of the highest car traffic densities in Europe. They're intentionally changing the design of the city so that they can reduce the impact of cars on air pollution and mental health and stress, because the noise of vehicles is also very impactful on psychology and well-being. So what they've implemented is this Superblock plan. And what a Superblock is basically 9 standard blocks in one big square, and all the streets within that grid, the traffic is cut off or minimized there, except for, let's say, emergency vehicles. So certain vehicles are allowed to pass, bicycles are allowed to pass, but in general, the traffic is greatly reduced, or it's not allowed within that Superblock area. It is redirected to the streets around the Superblock, basically. So it's the traffic and the cars are pulled out of the center of the grid and redirected around the grid. And within that grid, you have design for people. You have play areas for children. You have outdoor seating from cafes so people can have a drink or have lunch. You have exercise areas. You have benches. You have gardens. You have a variety of human-friendly design elements and amenities. And the goal is to create a space for people instead of a space for cars. So this Superblock plan is being implemented gradually throughout the city in different neighborhoods. And the thing that I mentioned earlier is that it's not only the superblocks within the plan, there's also the green streets, which is the pedestrianized streets like Kunsel Descent that I mentioned earlier.
They're pedestrianizing large portions of the city. I wish they would do that in New York, and there's a lot of cities that can actually benefit from this. Like we don't need cars to be traveling through every single open block in the city.
Absolutely.
It's not really that necessary.
At the end of the day, it's about making healthier, happier people and creating more prosperity across the board. Because if you have a city designed for cars, then cars will prosper. The auto industry will prosper. You're going to have a lot of parking spaces and you're going to have a lot of wide streets. However, because there is a limited amount of space in any city, if you give a ton of that space over to car infrastructure, that means you're taking it away from human infrastructure. You're taking it away from walkable neighborhoods. You're taking it away from public spaces, parks and squares, and you're giving it over to cars. And cars don't shop. Cars don't stroll. Cars don't talk with their neighbors. Cars do not contribute to community life and to society. They only move us from A to B. But in order to get from A to B, we're sacrificing the reason why we want to be in A or B in the first place, because we're destroying A and B in order to make it easier to move between them. So cities that recognize this, that
Right.
car infrastructure and cars take value away from cities, they have begun to shift their focus away from making the city a more easy and comfortable place to drive through into making the city a more easy and comfortable place to walk through, a more enjoyable place to live in, a more pleasant place to explore and interact with. Because if you're out in the city, walking and hanging out and talking with friends, one, you're building community and social connections, which is vital for your mental health. Two, you are walking, which is vital for your physical health. You are biking, you are engaging in physical activity rather than just sitting in your car. Three, when you are walking around a city with your friends or alone, what do you like to do? You like to pop into shops. You like to have an ice cream. You like to sit down at a cafe. Basically, you like to engage with businesses. You like to give your money to businesses so businesses prosper. Basically, everything prospers when you have a city designed for people instead of for cars.
I think people who live in car-dominated cities or suburban environments don't truly realize the benefit of being able to walk from place to place. Because you mentioned it so well, is you're going from just A to B. And the problem is usually point A is your home and point B is the store, the commercial area that you're visiting. B has to basically have everything or nothing. So B has to be basically the big Walmart that has the Starbucks inside, that has all the shopping in there, that has the parking, that has the place to recharge your car or a gasoline station next to it. Has to have everything. But in the major city, as you're walking around There's opportunity to have a butcher shop, to have the steakhouse, to have the cafe, to have the floral shop, which you see on any typical Barcelonan street. So right now, cue the sounds of the birds, people murmuring in the background, the sound of cafe. Describe to us, what's a few blocks walk in the Barcelonan street from your experience?
I think that something that I talked about on another podcast, and I think in one of my TikTok videos, that my commute was the most enjoyable walk I've ever taken, and I took it all the time. Now, when you compare it to what people normally think of when they think of a commute, they think of a stressful, boring, dull drain on their time and energy that leaves them frustrated and tired after having to deal with traffic and parking and bad drivers and etc. Even though my commute was an hour long, I enjoyed taking it. Why? Because I had the opportunity to walk through beautifully designed and planned neighborhoods. It was designed so that it would be pleasant for me to walk through it for an hour from the north of the city to the very south of the city. I crossed the entire city and did it with a smile on my face, because everywhere you look when you're taking that walk through the center of Barcelona, you see outdoor seating full of people enjoying food and cafe and beers with their friends. You see boutiques, you see all kinds of jewelry and clothing and tech and every kind of shop, watches and clothes and bakeries, and that engages your senses, it engages your interests, it makes you want to walk in to buy a treat or a gift for yourself or somebody else, because it pulls you in and because it's easy to do so. If I see something I like in the window of a shop, I don't have to worry about finding parking in order to get to it. I literally just walk in and buy it.
Right.
That's why it's so valuable for businesses to be within a walkable neighborhood, because people just walk past, look at the window display, like what they see, walk in and buy it. It's a very seamless process, which is not the case with driving at all.
Exactly. It allows for spontaneity, the ability to go for that random coffee, or as you mentioned, buy that random gift, or buy that random flower, or buy a few pastries. And that spontaneity actually enables a whole host of businesses that usually are not seen in car-dominated spaces, urban environments. You don't see the tiny little pastry shop that just specializes in, give me a good pastry in Barcelona.
There's one that is
empanadas.
not... Empanadas are popular, Argentinian empanadas. I would also say the Portuguese natas, which are the custards, the egg custards, are also very popular in Barcelona.
So in a suburban environment, you would not see a specialty pastry shop in just Portuguese tarts, because you would have to have a bigger bakery, usually having everything to accommodate anyone who's coming in via car, because who's going to drive to have Portuguese tart? And I think that's why cities thrive beyond just providing what we think we need. It provides things that we didn't even know we wanted.
Exactly. I think that is such a key element of what you said, is that oftentimes you don't know that you want a Portuguese egg custard tart because you don't know what that is. And so in a suburban car-centric environment, in order to find a place like that, first you have to know it exists. Second, you have to figure out where it is, which means you have to type it into Google Maps. So like you said, there's no spontaneity, there's no opportunity to explore and discover interesting new things because you can't explore. It's not walkable. And when you're driving past at 40 miles per hour, you don't see these fine-grained details of what's happening in the window displays. You can't see that. So you can't do the kind of exploration that allows you to discover new businesses, new experiences, and interesting new things. Whereas if you're walking because the neighborhood is pleasant to walk through, it's been designed to encourage you to walk. You know, that's what walkability is at the end of the day. So it encourages you to walk, you're walking, and as you walk, you look inside of shops and window displays and you see something that draws you in and catches your eye. like a delectable looking custard tart, and you walk in and you buy it and you taste it and you think, wow, this is amazing. How lucky I am to have discovered this. But you never would have if you were just driving past it. And that's key to business success, is creating an environment where people want to walk into your shop and buy something new because it's enjoyable to do that.
That is the point of cities. So if you don't like them, if you don't want that, then you don't need to live in a city. If you want to drive from point A to point B, that's okay. But cities thrive on that spontaneity. They need to grow on that spontaneity. It's the point of a city. It has been the case for thousands of years, since Hippodamus in ancient Piraeus to now. It's super important. So what do you think about that when you hear that argument of like, yeah, but I don't care about this little Portuguese tart. I don't care about the flower shop.
And I get this criticism a lot. And I recently made a video about it titled, well, then maybe it's not for you. And the whole argument in that video, which I will repeat now, is that if you hear advice, or if you hear a video about or a podcast about, if you hear people talking about the importance of walkability and public transit and cycling infrastructure and fine-grained businesses and all of these things that we're talking about now, but you don't like that because you want to live in the middle of nature, for example. You like having big expanses of fields or mountains or nature around you, then that information, that advice is just simply not for you. There's no need to fight against it or criticize it. If you enjoy having a big house in a car-centric suburb where the most important thing to you is your personal space and your personal yard, and you don't really care about community life or social life, you prefer to be alone, you're not a very outgoing person, and you like the comfort of sitting in your car and going to the grocery store, which is a 15-minute drive away, which you have the freedom and right to like. Everybody likes different things. If you really enjoy that, then there's plenty of suburbs like that in the United States, plenty of communities like that that you can live in happily. The problem is that many people, as we see from data, from statistics, from polls, millions of people don't like that. And they want to live in places where they can interact with people and where they can have interesting experiences and where they can stumble upon the Portuguese egg custard tart shop. They want that. Actually, recently, there was a study by a real estate organization, I think it was, that found that I think 90% of Gen Z and about 80% of millennials want walkable neighborhoods and are willing to pay more to live in walkable neighborhoods. So the majority of people in the modern day and age want walkability and places that have mixed-use development like Barcelona. If you're part of the 25% that doesn't want that, that's totally okay. You have the freedom to like what you like and have the preferences that you have. In that case, this conversation about creating great cities is probably not something that you're interested in or care about, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean that you should fight against the development of cities and walkability and mixed-use development, because a whole lot of people want that and want more of that, and we should have the options. What America needs, especially, and other countries, it's not just the United States problem, but anywhere you go, you need to have opportunities for different kinds of experiences. You need to have options for different kind of living so that you can pick the one that's best for you. But if you only have a predominance of one type, which is what we're seeing in the US with car-centric suburbs, car-centrism is very widespread, whereas walkable cities are not. When you see this, that's not fair to all of those millions of people who want to have the option of living in walkable cities like Barcelona. So we need to create more of those kinds of communities.
Exactly. And Barcelona is a great example of how density done well actually provides for more space to nature nearby. So in Barcelona, right in the middle of the city, you have the hills with the fortress. And that is now overrun with sprawl, as is the case with some of the bigger American cities that are so sprawling that there is no space for a hill with a great view. Cities like Phoenix, certain areas of New York City, like in Brooklyn. But it is the case in Barcelona. And only 40 minutes away from Barcelona by public transit, you have the mountains with some of the most beautiful monasteries and other landmarks in the world. And it's very naturesque. And then the beaches as well. So by building density in a smart way, Barcelona actually has enabled its residents to still be within transit distance to all these beautiful nature spots.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate that density, like a very solid amount of population density, more than New York City, can be achieved in a way that you don't even notice its density, because when it's consistent over a large area, like those 6-floor buildings built everywhere, which is what you see in Paris as well, which also has a very high population density. So this kind of consistent, moderate height buildings creates a very high population density that feels comfortable, doesn't feel crowded, and allows for a city to host a lot of people in a more compact way, while still maintaining its tranquility and peace, and being able to coexist with nature, like you said. Because when things are sprawling and spread out like the suburbs, in order to achieve that sprawl, they have to destroy the nature, because they have to build on top of it. So in a sprawling suburban environment, you're actually sacrificing a lot more of that nature than you would in a compact city that has a good amount of population density, where you can preserve the nature outside its borders.
Yeah, because car-centric design requires much more space than human-centered design, walkable-centered design, or transit-centered design. Because with the car, you have to accommodate parking, you have to accommodate roads, and roads you generally have to be straighter with curves to allow it to be easier to drive. And then distances can't be too short with the car, because then what's the point of the car? So it incentivizes more and more sprawl, which is not the case you see in Barcelona, despite it also having issues with the car in the past century. But that's what makes Barcelona a really interesting city. So let's get a little bit more granular. So we covered the Superblock. We covered the actual design of the blocks in neighborhoods like Champlain. And then you just quickly mentioning we have neighborhoods like Bourne, which is predating the grid system, which feels very easy to walk around. And then we have a proximity to nature and beaches. What else does Barcelona's design make it so unique?
The fact that the architecture is so beautiful, and I think to put effort into creating a beautiful city makes people feel more welcomed and like the city values them. When the city is beautiful, that's free, because you are not free to make, free to experience. Because if you are walking through the streets of a city, you're not buying anything, you're not paying for anything, but nevertheless, you are surrounded by beauty, which in a more consumerist society, you would have to pay to experience. For example, businesses, fashion, all of this type of industry uses beauty to get customers, to gain money. But when the city itself, the public spaces, the landmarks, the architecture, the buildings are beautiful, you can consume that for free, because you walk around it and you see it, and it inspires you. It makes you feel proud of the city, and makes you want to create more beauty, and makes you feel good, because we like beauty. Human beings like beautiful things, and that's a topic that's a much deeper topic, because I feel like for a long time we've overlooked the importance of beauty, and beauty is actually very important for mental health and life satisfaction. A lot of our modern cities aren't beautiful, and we seem to think that beauty is something superficial that doesn't require our attention, and that's not true at all, and we can talk about that in a different episode more deeply. But Barcelona's beauty and its effort, the fact that it makes the effort to be beautiful, I think makes it incredibly unique, because it's not just one building or one neighborhood that stands out as being beautiful. The majority of the city really is very well designed, and it has a lot of aesthetic value. Another part of the things that I think make Barcelona such a great city is the transit, the ease with which you can move around the city. And I think that that is integral to feeling free. The feeling of freedom is the ability to move around and go wherever you want to go and not be dependent on only one mode of transportation, where if that doesn't work for whatever reason, you're stuck. Being able to get around in a variety of different ways, to have a plan B, plan C, plan D, that is essential, I think, to feeling relaxed and to feeling free, because you can get to wherever you need to get to at any time without much difficulty. And Barcelona has wonderful public transit. It has an amazing metro system that's very clean, very well connected. It has amazing buses that are very easy to use, that are very frequent and very regular and usually very on time. It has great cycling infrastructure with a lot of city bikes and city bike stations. It's comfortable and safe for people on scooters and on skateboards. It's walkable, like we've talked about extensively. So every kind of transportation that you want to use to get around is available in Barcelona, including cars and taxis. So basically you have a lot of options for getting around, and they're all comfortable, accessible, convenient, and affordable. And I think that is also what makes it such a great city.
Yeah, you make an excellent point with the beauty of a city is so underrated. The beauty of neighborhoods like Chample in Barcelona is uniformity, a set rules of design that is applied through every building in that neighborhood. And then there's some room for freedom, but that uniformity makes it more pleasant to walk around, so you know what neighborhood you are in the city. Yeah. And this is reflected in neighborhoods like in New York with Park Slope, Brooklyn, with brownstones, and reflected in Paris in the middle of the city. But Barcelona does this really well. And it goes to show that Barcelona did this intentionally with Cerda's plan. And then other neighborhoods also adopted very similar design elements. Aside from that is people tend to equate major cities that are walkable and transit friendly like Barcelona as it being terrible for driving. The car is still necessary in some elements of city life. You need it for emergency vehicles. It is convenient sometimes for taxis, and it is convenient sometimes for people with disabilities that want to get around. But Barcelona shows that you can still get around via car. It's not impossible. And Barcelona actually ingeniously incorporates the car into its city. It's not a fully pedestrianized city, because a fully pedestrianized city will only work in certain sections and won't work in general because the car is still very much needed in many aspects of society. But we tend to overrate it or overemphasize its need in North American cities.
The Superblocks plan, something that they say is that a city like Barcelona, with this much density and things going on and pedestrian life, it shouldn't be host to this many cars. And I think that is so essential for people to understand, is that a city, the main functions of a city are to create a community, to bring people together for community and social life, and also to be a place for businesses, to do business activity and get customers and thrive. And having huge streets with noisy traffic that cut through every block and neighborhood, that is counter to those goals, because people don't like to hang out and sit outside of the cafe when there are noisy, smelly cars whizzing past them. Businesses aren't going to be as active, aren't going to make as much money if people don't enjoy walking past them, looking in the storefronts and walking in. These functions, the functions of a city, are often being sacrificed to make it more comfortable and convenient for cars to drive through them, which is counterproductive and doesn't make sense.
Yeah, actually, a genius part of the design of the grand boulevards of Barcelona, which is not applied to, say, the boulevards here in New York City is that they make them wonderful to walk, drive, bicycle, and take public transportation through. So Diagonal is a great example because Diagonal, you have the main Strode, because it is a Strode or a boulevard with, I think, 4 lanes of traffic, 2 ways, if I'm correct, or maybe 1 way. But nonetheless, there's multiple lanes of traffic. But then to separate the pedestrian from the traffic, you have a walkway that's very wide enough to walk and bicycle through. And then you have the marginal lane right next to the street, which enables A, bus traffic, and then B, a taxi or some type of emergency vehicle to park right next to the building's entrance. So that type of design, even though the boulevards are wide, you still have a great street design that makes you feel shielded from the cars. And the cars, luckily, are also shielded by the pedestrians, so they're not too impeded by being so close proximity to pedestrians, which could be very dangerous. So that is another great element of Barcelona's design. To finish up this episode, what is your top? Where do you recommend people to go to in Barcelona to enjoy the most perfect, serene, urban design of the city? What's one specific area of Barcelona?
That is a very difficult question because I think so many areas of Barcelona are so well designed. But what I would recommend is people take my commute that I used to take from my job to my home, which goes down Rambla Catalunya. So it starts at Diagonal, the street we just talked about, which is brilliantly designed, like you explained, like the way that the lanes and the median and the pedestrian areas and the cycling and the bus, everything is accounted for and designed. The street is beautifully designed, even though it's very wide. So I would start at Diagonal, move down Rambla Catalunya, which is another wide street, except the majority of it is a pedestrian area right down the middle. And that pedestrian area is full of cafes and outdoor seating and people at all hours of the day enjoying each other's company and having coffees or drinks or lunch. So you walk down Rambla Catalunya, the cafe street, I call it. You go through the main plaza of the city, which is Plaza de Catalunya, where it's a very big plaza and people are playing music or selling balloons. Children are playing and chasing pigeons, and you have fountains, and it's a great public space. We often have concerts there and public events, and you go through that area. Then you go down Port Angel, which is another pedestrian street, which is fully pedestrian, and it's a shopping street with a lot of great stores on both sides. It's interesting because on one side you have like vendors, like very small businesses, craftsmen who sell like handmade masks or jewelry or clothes. On one side you have the booths for the craftsmen, and on the other side you have the big business stores that are chains, for example. You go down that street and then you're going to end up at the square where you have the cathedral, which is beautiful, beautiful cathedral. It's one of those buildings that you look at it and you're just struck with awe, and it makes you reflect on your life. And the beauty of this building is just so inspiring and fulfills you with so much emotion. So you see the cathedral. There's usually performances there and people dancing and people gather to see them. From that square, you start going through the narrow streets of the Gothic neighborhood, what I talked about earlier, those labyrinth-like streets, which are so fun to explore because they go in all directions, which is, for me, a weakness of the grid system is that it's too predictable and there's nothing interesting to explore and discover because it's all a grid. But neighborhoods like the Gothic neighborhood are unpredictable. Every street leads you to another adventure and treasure that you haven't even discovered before, no matter how long you've lived there. So explore those little streets and then cross via Laietana, which is another big car street. It's another street where you have a lot of traffic. But on the other side of it, you have the Born neighborhood, and the Born neighborhood is another labyrinth neighborhood, another old style Gothic neighborhood with those narrow, cozy streets where you get the feeling of enclosure full of these small, beautiful boutiques and cafes and restaurants. And it's just a wonderful experience to walk through them. And it's also very peaceful because they're so narrow. You don't have a lot of people. You can just be alone with your thoughts. That neighborhood is where people love to gather in the evening. They take their drinks that they buy from the restaurants and the bars, and they gather in the public square. And they constantly, if you walk through there, you'll constantly see people meeting each other and just walking up to each other and saying, "Hi, I like your jacket," or "What are you drinking?" and constantly making spontaneous new connections and friendships because it's so fun and easy to do. The environment makes it so easy to do. After that neighborhood, cross another very big boulevard with a lot of traffic, and you'll get to the Barceloneta neighborhood, which is where I used to live. That was my ending point when I was on my commute. On one side, you have the port with the yachts and restaurants and cafes. On the other side, you have the residential area with the neighborhoods and grocery stores, bakeries, and other things. And you have a lot of trees and shade. At the end of that neighborhood, you have the sea. So you have the nature. We go from the city, we end up at the nature, beautiful views of the sunset, and then you can have a drink at the end of your workday to celebrate finishing the day, having that beautiful walk where you were physically active, where you met with friends, where you enjoyed the beauty of the city and were inspired by it. And it really makes you reflect on how great life can be in a well-designed city like Barcelona.
That's amazing. All right, I'm gonna buy my ticket right now to go to Barcelona.
Let's make more cities like this.
I can't wait to do our episode on New York City because I think New York City could learn a whole lot about Barcelona. So let me know, what, in your opinion, makes for a perfect city? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear your thoughts. And if you've been to Barcelona, let us know what's your favorite part of Barcelona as well. I'm Ariel. This is Dr. Tayana Panova of The Perfect City. Stay curious, my friends.